You've been told Christopher Columbus discovered America, sailed the ocean blue in 1492, found a new world, made history. We even named a day after him. But what if I told you he was 5 centuries too late? 500 years before his ships kissed the Caribbean waters, Viking boots had already touched North American soil. Not in legend, but in fact. And leading them, a man with no crown, no maps, no desire to conquer. His name was Leif Erikson. He was the son of an outlaw, a believer in a new god, a sailor born of ice and fire who heard whispers of a land beyond the edge of the world. And he followed those whispers. Not only did he follow them, he found it. Vinland. Rich, green, wild, and then he simply walked away. But why? Why did he see it? Why did he touch it and feel it? And then why did he walk away? What did he know that we don't? What are we missing? Today, we step into that forgotten voyage, not just to discover the new lands, but to understand what drives someone to chase the edge of the map and what kind of person returns. Because the story of Leif Erikson isn't just about where he went. It's about the courage to go. So ask yourself, what awaits beyond the safe shore of your life? And what would it take to leave it behind? Let's find out. Imagine Leif and his crew aboard a ship exploring uncharted territory. The sails are torn, the hull groans with every wave, and still the ship pushed westward, into fog, into legend, into a land no Norseman had claimed. At the helm stood Leif Erikson, son of an outlaw, heir to a dream, caught between two worlds, the old gods of his father and the strange rising faith of a crucified king. He wasn't looking for war. He was looking for a new beginning, a fresh start, a place unspoiled, a land where men could begin again. And what he found? Paradise. Rivers clean enough to drink, forests thick with game, vines heavy with wild grapes, so many that the land would be called Vinland. But that wasn't the only thing they found, because hidden in the trees were eyes watching every move. And one of Leif's own crew would never return home. We'll tell you who died and what his final words were. And there's one more twist, a strange clue buried in the saga that suggests Leif may not have been the first Viking to see America, only the first to set foot on its shores and the first to survive. This is not just a tale of exploration, it's a test of legacy and a question for you. What would you risk to find a better world? The sea had been his cradle, the cold his companion, and history, it had not yet written his name. Leif was born to the exile, Erik the Red, who carved a home out of ice and defiance. Erik, flame-haired and iron-willed, had been cast from Norway for bloodshed, cast from Iceland for vengeance, and finally cast ashore on a land no man yet dared call home. He named it Greenland, not for what it was, but for what men might believe it was. For even outlaws dreamed of kingdoms, and in that frozen, wind-battered corner of the world, Leif was raised. Not among books and church bells, he learned to sail before he could shave, learned to track seals along the ice floes, and to split driftwood with a single clean stroke. At night, the sagas were sung in low voices, tales of dragons, gods, and doomed heroes. But always, it was the silence between the words that shaped him, the space where men wondered, what lies beyond this horizon? The winters came thick and cruel in Greenland, chewing through bone and spirit alike. Yet Leif grew tall, broader than most according to his mother, and a sharper mind than even his father dared to admit. He watched storms with a sailor's hunger and weighed every wave with a priest's patience. But where Erik's heart had been wild, Leif was steady. What he burned for, he didn't show. Then came the tale. Bjarni, a merchant turned wanderer, returned from a failed voyage, his sails tattered, his crew half mad, his eyes still reflecting something more than the sea. He had been blown far off course, he said, west, so far west that the sea lost its name. And there, beyond the ice-lipped winds, he had seen land lush, green, untouched. He had not landed, he turned back. Fool, Erik muttered, to see paradise and then flee it? But Leif said nothing. He only listened, and the fire in him began to grow. Months later, when Bjarni's ship came up for sale, Leif bought it. Quietly, he took only 12 men he trusted, not just to fight, but to believe. He said nothing grand, no oath of conquest, no vow to Odin or Thor, only this: we sail west. They laughed at him in whispers. Too young, too bold, a dreamer with his father's eyes, but none of his fury. The west is fog and death, they warned. The sea swallows the hopeful first. But Leif didn't flinch. He was already looking past them. The wind howled like a curse when they launched, slicing through the sinew and sail. The sky went black within days, and the sun refused to show its face. The waves heaved like the breath of the world serpent, and the ship creaked with every exhale, wood weeping against the strain. They pushed through, setting their hopes on this mysterious land to the west, but then came the fog. A fog so thick its silent sound made even the waves feel distant. If a man could reach out and not see his own hand, they drifted like ghosts. No stars, no sun, no shore. The crew muttered of curses, of turning back. And then, one night, with nothing to guide them but prayer and madness, the men rose up. Voices sharp, hands on their hilts, eyes wild. They wanted to go back. We've passed into the world's end, one cried. Odin cannot find us now, whispered another. But Leif did not draw his blade. He stood at the prow, arms raised, not to the gods of his fathers, but to the God of the cross, the one with infinite strength, and the Savior who had calmed the storms according to the book they wrote about him. He prayed, not aloud, but with a breath that filled the sails. Guide us, Lord. If there is land beyond this sea, grant us the will to find it. The next morning, the fog broke, and there it was, a land of flat stones, endless rock like shattered bone. White foxes darted between crevices, silent as spirits. The beaches were cold and hard, and the wind carried nothing sweet. They stepped ashore, marked it on their crude maps, and they left. This was not the place. This was not paradise. They sailed south. The days grew warmer. The air softened, and they came to Markland. Towering trees, pines like green spires, forests deeper than memory. They walked beneath the canopy, felt the earth spring with life, saw rivers run with silver fish. This was closer, but still not the land Leif saw in his mind. They sailed again, south and west. The coastline changed. The sun hung longer in the sky, and then, as if the earth itself had decided to smile, Vinland. Wild grapes hung like jewels from curling vines. The rivers ran cold and clear. The soil, black and rich, smelled of promise. Deer watched them with wide eyes. Wild wheat grew without hand or plow, and the air, it did not bite, it welcomed. Here at last was the land that Bjarni had seen, but only Leif had reached. They built shelters of timber, named the place Leif's Booths. They fished, they hunted, they laughed like men who had outrun fate. They praised the God of the Christians for his mercy, and they toasted the old gods for not sinking them while they were at sea. Leif kept no crown, claimed no empire. He only explored, watched, and measured. His men whispered that the land was too good, too perfect, that the gods might grow jealous. Still, they stayed. But even the most beautiful flower sometimes has thorns, and Leif was about to see them, because they were not alone. And Leif was about to learn that no land comes without blood. To understand Leif Erikson, the man, the myth, and the mystery, we must step back from the roaring sea and into the quiet pages of two medieval Icelandic texts, the Saga of the Greenlanders and the Saga of Erik the Red. These are not modern biographies. They are part folklore, part family history, and part national memory. They are oral traditions finally committed to text hundreds of years after Leif's voyage. And yet, within their pages lie one of the most astonishing truths in human exploration. The Vikings, led by Leif Erikson, reached North America almost 500 years before Columbus. To put that into perspective, America is almost 250 years old at the time of this recording. Double that and you have the difference between the first and second European to set foot in North America. But as with all legends passed from voice to voice, the truth wears many faces. In the Saga of the Greenlanders, Leif is portrayed as a curious young man who hears of strange lands sighted by the merchant Bjarni. Unlike Bjarni, who saw the coastlines of what we now call North America, he never made landfall. Leif takes action. He purchases Bjarni's ship, gathers a small but loyal crew, and charts a course west. This version paints Leif as deliberate, a man with a plan, emboldened by secondhand sightings and determined to turn rumor into reality. The Saga of Erik the Red, however, gives us a more mythic version. Here, Leif's discovery is accidental. He's blown off course while returning from Norway, where he spent time in the court of King Olaf, who just happens to be one of the most zealous Christian rulers of the Viking Age. According to the saga, Leif is not looking for a new world. He simply stumbles upon it. So which version is true? Perhaps both, perhaps neither. This is the tension at the heart of Leif's story. Part explorer, part pilgrim, part accident, part divine providence. What the sagas agree on is what Leif found. The first place was the land of the flat stones. Scholars believe this is likely Baffin Island, a cold and forbidding place. Next came Markland, the forest land, which may have been modern-day Labrador. But it was the third and final land that stirred the hearts of the Northmen and scribes alike, Vinland. Vinland was warm by Viking standard, fertile and wild. The sagas describe grapes growing freely on the hillsides, self-sown wheat ripening in the breeze, and game so plentiful that men wanted for nothing. While much debate surrounds the precise location, the most likely candidate based on the sailing descriptions, climate, and archaeological findings is northern Newfoundland. Here at the northern tip of the island, archaeologists in the 1960s unearthed something astonishing: the remains of a Viking outpost, longhouses, iron nails, and spindles, and all unmistakably Norse, dated around 1000 AD, exactly when the sagas claim Leif set sail. Suddenly, the sagas have become science, myth has become map, and Leif stepped from legend into fact. But Leif's journey was not just geographic, it was spiritual. When he sailed to Norway, he found a kingdom in theological transition. King Olaf, a fierce proponent of Christianity. He had made it his mission to convert all of the Norse world, sometimes by fire and often by sword. Needless to say, Leif was intrigued and perhaps convicted. He was baptized and even trained in the ways of the gospel before returning home to Greenland. But Erik the Red, Leif's father and Greenland's founder, refused to convert. He clung to the old gods of Asgard. Odin the Wise, Thor the Thunderer, Freya the Bringer of Bounty. This put father and son at odds, not just over religion, but over what kind of world the Norse should become. Caught between gods and God, between saga and scripture, Leif didn't retreat. He moved forward. He explored. Thus, Leif's voyage to Vinland was not merely a hunt for land, it was a search for identity. He carried with him both the sword and the cross. He built shelters in Vinland, not as a conqueror, but as a caretaker. He made no claims, minted no coins, raised no banners. His journey stands in stark contrast to later European explorers who came with chains and cannons. That's why historians now call Leif one of the first true explorers of the Western world. He earned the nickname Leif the Lucky, but it's worth asking, was it really luck? He survived storms, mutiny, and uncharted waters. He navigated fog-thick seas without compass or guide. He convinced men to follow him into the unknown and brought them home alive. In a world where most feared the edge of the map, Leif stepped beyond it. So no, it wasn't just luck. It was courage and maybe even faith. When others turned back, he sailed on. When others were afraid to launch, he set sail. Fast forward, today, Leif Erikson stands at a crossroads in our historical imagination. Some remember him as a footnote overshadowed by Columbus. Others lift him up as a symbol of what could have been. A peaceful encounter, a moment where East meets West, not in blood, but in boldness. But more than anything, Leif remains a man between two worlds. He sailed from the frost of exile to the warmth of Vinland, from Odin's fury to Christ's peace, from Greenland's edge to the shores of history. And though his time in the New World was brief, his legacy echoes through every explorer who ever asked, what lies beyond? Leif Erikson's name survives, but his settlement did not. And that might be the greatest mystery of all, because here's the strange truth. The Vikings found America and then left it. No cathedrals, no colonies, no kings. Just 500 years of silence, like footsteps in the snow erased by the morning sun. Why? Why would men who braved the North Atlantic, who laughed at death and buried swords with their dead, walk away from the richest land they'd ever seen? The sagas offer clues, but not answers. They speak of hostile natives, who the Norse named, and depending on the scholar, the name they gave them may have meant something like weakling, barbarian, or screamers. But these people were not weak. They were fierce. They were fast, and they were unfamiliar. And perhaps they were angry. The tension began quietly. Shadowed eyes in the woods, cautious trades of red cloth for animal skins. But it didn't stay peaceful. One morning, the sagas say Leif's brother Thorvald Eriksson sailed along the coast and made landfall. They saw 3 small shelters. Nobody was home. They tore them down. Later that day, the true inhabitants came home. Arrows rained from the forest. Thorvald was struck beneath the arm. His wound festered, and as he lay dying beneath the pines, he said, "This is a good place. Let me be buried here." Those were his final words. A stone mound was raised over his body. No cross, no rune, just rocks and memory, and a warning. Other expeditions followed, all driven by either glory or greed, or sometimes just the stubborn hope that Leif's Vinland still waited ripe and untouched. But something always went wrong. According to the saga of the Greenlanders, Leif's sister made an attempt to settle Vinland. She resorted to murder, killing her own expedition partners in a fit of rage. Another tried to settle, bringing livestock and women, but the conflicts with the natives escalated. A baby was even born on Vinlandic soil, the first recorded child of European descent born in the Americas. I wonder if he had dual citizenship. Either way, they still left. You might think it was fear or weather or isolation, but here's the twist. The truth that most people miss. It wasn't just outside forces that drove them back. It was economics. There was nothing to take. No gold, no tribute, no silver hoards, and no monasteries to raid. The land was beautiful, but it was not lucrative. Vikings were more than warriors. They were merchants, accountants with axes. Greenland and Iceland, for all their hardship, had trade networks. Europe had wealth. Even distant Byzantium offered silver to Norse mercenaries. But Vinland had berries. Try paying taxes with grapes or raisins. This is what scholars now recognize as the deeper reason the Norse didn't stay. They were not colonists in the modern sense. They didn't conquer for flag or crown. They settled only where the land or the neighbors offered something in return. Vinland, for all its promise, was isolated, a beautiful dream, but an unprofitable one. So they left it behind, and slowly Vinland became something else, a song, a myth, a word whispered by fireside skalds, half true and half magic. And Leif, he never returned. He became a chieftain in Greenland, raised children, spoke of his travels, maybe, or maybe not. No letters, no memoirs, just the sagas written long after his bones turned to dust. But somewhere in the north, the wind still shifts over the stones where Leif walked. Somewhere beneath the centuries of moss, a grave may still hold the brother of Leif Erikson. So, if the Vikings reached America first and built a camp and left before anyone noticed, what does that mean for the rest of Leif's story? Because we left him standing on the shores of Vinland, grapes in hand, hope in his eyes, and eyes watching him from the trees. So let's return to the storm-worn ship, to the cliffs where paradise meets fear, to the moment when Leif Erikson discovers this land is not empty, and no land gives without taking. So stay with us, because paradise is about to turn on its visitors. It didn't take long to come up with a name for Vinland. The land had the potential to produce unlimited wine. Feeling the warm breeze gave birth to dreams of riches, but not all sweetness is safe. The cost to gain paradise may surprise you, and no land or treasure, however lovely, however valuable, gives without taking. At first, the days passed with wonder and awe. Fish leapt willingly into nets, the forest echoed with game, the men built timber halls and fire pits, carved benches and named rivers. They laughed like boys in summer. But Leif, he didn't laugh much. He stood often at the water's edge, staring into the mist beyond the horizon, not in fear, but in knowing. Because paradise has a rhythm, and this one beat all too quietly. They saw them first in the shadow, figures watching from the tree lines, motionless, silent as owls. Leif raised no alarm. He instructed the men, offer gifts, red cloth, beads, small iron tools. The strangers emerged, short of stature, dark of eye, wary of voice. These were the natives. There was no war, not yet. There were exchanges, furs for milk, skins for axes. There was even laughter, thin and fleeting like the last light before winter. But tensions clung to the air like salt to sweat. Not hatred, not rivalry, but the unease of two worlds breathing the same air, sharing the same land. One day, a bull, untethered, charged from the Norse camp and startled the native visitors. They vanished into the wood. Days passed, but then the arrows came. It was not a battle, it was a reckoning. The forest roared with strange cries. The Norse scrambled for shields and blades. Leif shouted orders over the noise, rallying the men back to the shallows where the sea could shield them. One man fell, an axe in his thigh. Another bled out beneath the grapevines, but they held their line, iron against wood, fear against fury. When it was over, the ground was littered with red cloth and broken shafts. The natives, they disappeared, and none of the Norse slept soundly after that. The winter followed like a wound. Game thinned. Men whispered. What once seemed like Eden now pressed inward. Trees too quiet, rivers too still. Leif kept order, patrolled the camp with slow steps and a watchful eye. He sang psalms from the Bible beneath his breath, gripping the hilt of his sword and holding tighter to the promises of what felt like a distant God. But the land no longer welcomed them. They stayed one more season, and then, at dawn, on a morning thick with fog, Leif gave the order. They packed what they could, timber, tools, and all the stories, and they left. The return voyage was grim. No songs, no boasts, only the slap of water against the hull and the ache of something left behind, not treasure but hope and unmet expectations. When they reached Greenland, the sea looked harsher than before, the houses smaller, the air colder. Erik the Red did not greet them. He had died that winter, stubborn to the last, unbaptized and unbending. Leif buried his father with stone and silence, and took his place as leader of the Greenlanders. Years passed. Leif ruled quietly, not with an iron fist, but with a steady hand. He married, raised sons. He told stories sometimes, but never the full one. Children would ask if Vinland was real, and he would smile, eyes drifting westward. In the final days, he climbed the bluff above the fjord where the wind howled loudest. Below, he could see the longhouse smoke rise, swirling, twisting. The sea glimmered like beaten silver. He closed his eyes, and there it was again. The smell of grapes in the sun, the cry of seabirds unknown to Greenland, the sound of arrows, the feel of his brother's dying breath beneath the trees. He didn't weep. He only whispered, "It was real. I saw it. I touched it, and one day I'll enter a paradise that far exceeds the beauty of Vinland." And with that, Leif Erikson faded, not in battle, not in fire, but in memory. No grand death, no thunder, only a legacy carried like driftwood on the tide, lost, returned, and rediscovered. The camp he built was buried in time, the saga nearly forgotten, until one day, 1,000 years later, the soil gave up its secret. At the edge of Newfoundland, beneath moss and stone, the Norse had left their mark. Axes, nails, hearths, proof that the tale was true, proof that Leif had reached the West as a bold explorer and walked away a Viking legend. He was called Leif the Lucky, but it was not luck that carried him across the sea. It was something deeper, a hunger, a faith, a willingness to leave safety behind and seek the light beyond the unknown. And maybe, just maybe, that's what made him great. He found paradise, he touched it, and then he let it go. Because the bravest explorers are not the ones who conquer, they're the ones who return home with stories and deep knowing that they accomplished something very few ever dare try. Leif Erikson crossed an ocean, found a new world, and walked away. Today, we marvel at his journey, but the deeper question lingers. What does it mean to discover something if no one stayed? We live in an age of exploration, not of forests and fjords, but of knowledge, We chart galaxies with telescopes and map genomes with microscopes. We launch satellites into orbit and scroll endlessly through digital frontiers. And yet, for all our progress, many of us feel further from meaning than ever before. But Leif's story is a sobering reminder. Vision is only part of the battle. The rest is legacy. He dared to go where no European had gone. He found a land untouched by sword or scroll. He laid no claim. He planted no flag. He explored and discovered what was possible. Even though he returned to Greenland, he lived knowing that he had attempted and succeeded at the impossible. Look, sometimes the first to arrive are not the ones who remain. And sometimes the purpose of the pioneer is not to conquer, but to clear the path for others, to inspire them to see the potential they have to do more, to go further, and to blaze their own trail. Leif Erikson didn't chase fame. He followed a conviction. He wasn't driven by gold or glory. He carried with him a new faith, quiet, resolute, and sailed into a world of the unknown, a world thought to be full of myth and monster. But he had a strength that not many of us ever tap into. That right there is the deeper legacy we forget. Not the land, not the grapes, not the longhouses, but the courage to leave the shore, to leave what's familiar and what's safe. The willingness to go without guarantee. He failed, in a way. The settlement collapsed, the dream slipped into saga, his name nearly disappeared. But failure is often the very starting point by which legacy begins. If we've learned anything from Leif, it's this: don't be afraid to fail. Today, many long for their own Vinland, not just a place, but a purpose. We want to build something that matters, to find peace, to find meaning, to experience our destiny. But we often wait, afraid to move until we're sure it will work, until the wind is perfect, until the map is clear, until we know we won't fail. He left behind everything familiar. He faced the unknown without anger or arrogance. And though he returned with no treasure, he returned with something even more valuable, a story. And a story that changed the shape of the world. And it still inspires us today. So if this episode stirred something in you, if you felt even a flicker of fire that sent Leif west, share this story. Leave a review, invite someone else to take a venture of faith. Email us at Viking Legacy and Lore @gmail.com. Share what the podcast meant to you. I believe that there's a legacy living in you and that you're on a path to discover who you were created to be.